And that's what we're doing. When you were at Thanksgiving, though, I wonder if many of you had a conversation like I had. Did anyone tell you that you're starting to look like one of your parents? Anybody get that? Oh my gosh, you're starting to look like your dad or your mom. Anybody get something like that?
I've been getting that for years.
You got that for years? Right, okay, cool. So like if somebody said to me, oh my gosh, you are looking an awful lot like your dad. And then another person would say to me, oh my gosh, you've got your mom's eyes. And I'm like, I've been around for like 34 years. So it's like now I'm growing into my parents. But, you know, it's interesting. When I was a little kid, I occasionally would get like, oh, you've got your mom's nose, or you've got your dad's jaw, or whatever. But as I'm getting older, I'm starting to look in the mirror and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm starting to see it. And the reason I'm starting to see it is because I'm starting to see pictures of my parents when they were my age. And I'm like, holy smokes, I have my dad's face. I have my mom's eyes, or what it is. Like, it's like I just like Dr. Frankenstein you right into my face here. And I say that to you tonight because that's kind of where we're going in this series. Not that we're piecemealing your parents and creating some monster over the next 2 weeks, but we're talking about this idea of incarnation. Incarnation. Now, incarnation is a church word. It's something that you don't hear a lot of times outside of churches, but especially during the Christmas season, we talk about what the incarnation is, or what incarnational living is like. So I want to kind of break this down for you, because it is a word that we don't use very often. Here's what it is. Incarnation is a person or thing regarded as, say this, embodying or exhibiting some quality, idea, or the like. It's a person or thing that is regarded as embodying or exhibiting some quality, idea, or the like. Okay? So incarnation is this idea, or it's this reality, really, that one thing is actually something else. Now, for the incarnation, as far as a doctrine is concerned in the church, we're going to go kind of theological for a second. It's a doctrine that the second person of the Trinity, Jesus, assumed human form in the person of Jesus Christ and is completely both God and man. That's what this idea of incarnation is. And you might say, well, that's a weird word. Why would we say it this way? Well, incarnation is actually like a compound word, coming from the word carnis, which is to mean flesh. And so incarnation can actually mean infleshed or enfleshment. Okay? So when something is incarnated, it is that thing in the flesh. Now, as we're talking about Jesus over this week and next week, I want you to think in terms of this. Jesus is God infleshed. Jesus is God infleshed. Now, I didn't come up with that. And I'll tell you, theologians didn't come up with that. Instead, it comes from the Gospel according to John. And we're going to be hanging out in John's Gospel both this week and next week. In fact, I would encourage you, if you're wanting to do a Christmas Bible study, just you and Jesus or something like that, open the Gospel of John for the next couple of weeks and just start reading through. Just start reading through. There's 21 chapters in it. You can go through that in 3 weeks. Okay? Like, it'll be great. So if you're looking for something, John chapter 1, and I'm going to give you a good deal of it tonight. So John chapter 1 starts like this. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God, and all things came into being through Him, and without Him, not one thing came into being. What has come into being, in Him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. Now, I'm going to stop there. Notice I've stopped putting yellow in this next portion. I put yellow highlights on the words and the phrases that particularly define and describe the character and the nature of Jesus and what the incarnation is. So on the one hand, we've got here, in the beginning, before anything was the Word. We've got Jesus, Word, Logos, the greatest revelation of God. Okay? And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was the beginning with God. He was in the beginning with God. So all this mentality of Jesus is before the baby in the manger, Jesus is. Okay? And that's what John's getting at right here. And there's life, and there's light, and light shines in the darkness. And John continues, he says, there was a man sent from God whose name was John. John the Baptist, John the Baptizer. He came as a witness to testify to the light so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. Okay, so this is really important here, because we can kind of get mixed up and go down this rabbit trail for a second. This isn't talking about Jesus, but it's talking about the cousin of Jesus, John the Baptist, whose primary role is to what? To point to Jesus. Now, this lets us know a little bit about where we're going in this series. You are not the light, but you are an ambassador of the light, and you are meant to point to the light. Part of incarnational living is not being the light, oh, look at me, but to point to the light. And so, John continues and says, the true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood or the will of the flesh or of the will of man, but of God. And listen to this verse 14. Would you read this with me? And the Word became flesh and lived among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory as of a father's only son, full of grace and truth. And so the Word, this mystery, this greatest, fullest, most exact revelation of who God truly is, became flesh. Why did it become flesh? Because up to this point, no one had ever seen God. Okay, so we'll keep going. John testified to him and cried out, this was he of whom I said, he who comes after me ranks ahead of me because he was before me. Check this out. From his fullness, we have all received what? Grace upon grace. The law was indeed given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. Now read this last one with me. No one has ever seen God. It is God, the only Son, who is close to the Father's heart, who has made him known. Now, this is just a great thing. This is a great thing for preachers like me. And I hope for you as a Christian, this is a huge, huge thing for you. And if you're like, I'm not really sure what I believe about Jesus or about Christianity in general, I'm just here because, I heard there was snow and maybe some Christmas music or whatever, or I don't know, it's just something to do on a Tuesday night. Wherever you are, this is one of the greatest pieces of Christian doctrine that there is. It's not about what we do or what we don't do. It's not about what we necessarily, what movies we watch and what words we don't say. It's not about the kind of music we listen to. This is the heart of it. God, whom no one has ever seen, is made known through Jesus Christ. Therefore, for the world, we know the nature of God. We know God because we have seen Jesus. This is why studying about Jesus is so important. Because when we read about Jesus, when we study about Jesus, we're not studying the history of a guy, of a first century Jew that lived for 33 years and then died. We are reading about the very nature of God. This is the power of the incarnation here, okay? I love the way that Job says it in chapter 42, verse 5 of his book. He says, my ears, talking to God, my ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. This is like chapter 42, where Job's got all kinds of questions about God for the first 40 chapters. And then in chapter 42, he simply says, my ears had heard of you. I only thought that I knew you, but now my eyes have seen you. That's kind of what humanity, what all existence was like before Jesus. We just thought we knew who God was. And in light of Jesus, wow. I say this to you tonight because my hope for tonight and for next week is that we can start thinking as a group of people that want to honor Jesus in our lives and want to make a difference in the world. We can answer the question, what does it mean for me today to live out the Christmas story. And I don't mean put on a little robe and go find some sheep and go find some barn. I don't mean that. I mean, what does it mean for you to live an incarnational life? To have the nature and the attributes and the glory of God so swarming your existence that everywhere you go, people could point to you and say, he's not God, but God's nature is all over him or her. The reason that I'm really talking about this is because you and I have a lot of bad representations in this world of what God looks like, don't we? And I don't even have to name them. Think of some of the bad representations of maybe Christianity or your faith or what it means to be a religious person. You don't have to look very far. You can look at high-ranking officials in politics, in business, people that use the grace of God, the message of Jesus maybe, and exploit it for their own ends and their own aims. And I want to tell you, that's not incarnational living. That is exploitation of the riches of heaven. And we want to get at something much, much deeper. So we're going back to the one that did it the best, God himself, Jesus. Because in Jesus, we see what humanity is supposed to be. So, as we go through this, you might have even asked this a couple times. What are the signs? What are the signs of incarnational living? What is God's will and God's plan for me? So many of us would love to have something like this, for God to just say to us, in a sign, a giant billboard, this is it, right? Well, John, the author of the New Testament gospel, John frequently uses this word, semeion. Say that with me, semeion. And this word means sign or fingerprint of God. Sign or fingerprint of God. And I love that, right? This semeion is the fingerprint of God. And John speaks of about seven or so signs, semeions, that say, this is not just a miracle. This points to a greater thing. Listen to what this commentary says. The New Interpreter's Bible says it like this. The person who interprets a miracle solely as a miraculous act will remain transfixed by and limited to the act itself. Jesus could be revered, but only as a miracle worker. Do you see what's happening here? What one could proclaim about Jesus from that perspective is, look what Jesus can do. So it's almost like when you just look at the miracles and the things that Jesus did, it's like, oh, Jesus is like a cool magician. He can do this. He can open the eyes of the blind. And those are great and cool things. But what John wants to do is much further. Listen to this. When a miraculous act is fully understood as a sign, a fingerprint of God, however, what one would proclaim about Jesus is, look at who Jesus is, not at what Jesus can do. Now, do you see the difference there? We're not after what is the hand of God like. We're after what is the face and the heart and the nature of God like. Okay? So that's kind of where we're heading tonight and next week. I'm going to share with you 3 stories tonight. I'm going to share with you 4 stories next week. And each of these stories shows a different aspect of God's nature that I think you and I can try to emulate as we live out an incarnational life. Okay? The first one is this. You know the story of how Jesus turned water to wine. We're going to read it together. It says this. On the 3rd day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. And when the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. And Jesus said to her, woman, what concern is that to you and me? My hour has not yet come. And his mother said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. Don't you love that? Even Jesus' mom, Jesus is like, not now, Mom. It's not my business. And his mom's like, he's going to do it. He's a good son. memories of my mom there. It's good stuff. So now standing there were 6 stone water jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. And Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them to the brim. And he said to them, "Well, now draw some out and take it to the chief steward." So they took it, and when the steward tasted the water that had become wine and did not know where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the steward called the bridegroom and said to him, everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have all become drunk. But you've kept the good wine until now." And Jesus did this, the first of his signs in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Now, I don't know how theologically sound this is, but one very obvious reading of this is, oh my gosh, Jesus can turn up a party like that. Oh my gosh, like the wine is all gone, the party's kind of winding down, and then suddenly Jesus' mom says, "Jesus, let's get this party started." And Jesus is like, "Pour some water, y'all. Let's do this." And when they start to draw out the water, the wine is better than even the very first stuff that is usually used to get everybody drunk. Now, don't miss that. Because they bring out the bad stuff after everybody's had way too much because they don't care what kind of alcohol content it is at that point. But they're saying, "Wow, Jesus, this is new. It's usually watered down by this point, but not here. This is the best stuff." And Jesus did this, got to love this, to reveal his glory. He did this, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory. Now, without going too much into this, isn't it amazing how Jesus goes to this wedding, and while he's there, there's problems or whatever, there's some behind-the-scenes sort of things, the wine's running out. But as Jesus begins to interact, he is truly bringing the life into the party. He's bringing abundance. He's bringing generosity. Let me put it this way. Have you ever been around someone who just because they were there made the entire experience of whatever you were doing better? Have you ever thrown a party or a get-together and knew, okay, this group may not jive, but if this guy comes, then it's going to be a great party. It's going to be a great event. I've got a friend who is this. His name is Evan. He used to work here at Wesley, even before I worked here at Wesley. Evan is the kind of guy that if you invite him to something, the event's going to be a success. He is like the guy that he doesn't meet a stranger. For the guy that loves video games, he can talk video games for hours. He has fantasy football leagues and constantly winning those championship things. He's a great ultimate Frisbee player. He's a little bit into everything so that he can relate to absolutely everybody. He's the kind of guy that after about 10 minutes with him, you've got a brand new best friend. He and I and a few friends were out at a restaurant one time, and we realized that we didn't have some ketchup and mustard at our table. And he said, "Hang on, I see some right there in the kitchen." Evan got up, went into the kitchen, and we didn't see him for a few minutes. He comes out not just with ketchup and mustard, but with a few of the cooks. And they come out and they sit down with us for a while. Why? Because Evan befriended them just as he was going to get condiments. That's the kind of guy he is. I wish I had that kind of magnetic personality. I don't. I'm more like, "Oh, can somebody please bring me ketchup and mustard?" Or they really need this stuff. I've just got to get back out there. Not Evan. He notices absolutely everyone and befriends everyone that he comes into contact with. That's the kind of guy that I think Jesus is in this moment. Jesus is at this wedding. And Jesus, not only through the wine and all this stuff, but Jesus is the embodiment of abundance and generosity. So incarnational sign number 1 tells us about God. God is a generous giver of abundance. And I love this, that the best is yet to come. It's not in the past. Everybody expects the best to come first at the wedding, but Jesus says, no, something greater is coming. I think of this and I think of the world around us, and I wonder to myself, God has been so generous to me, and he's given me so abundantly, And I've truly come to realize in my life the best is yet to come. My best days aren't behind me. My God's plan and hope and dream for my life is still ahead of me, whether it's short or long term, 99, 120 years old. I truly believe that the best is yet to come. But the thing that I have to do when I think of that as God's nature is, what am I doing with how good God has been to me? If God is generous to me, how have I been generous to others? How can I be generous to others? Some of you get kind of awkward whenever we like go to lunch or whatever, and I'll pay for you or whatever, and I'm like, look, it's not a date, okay? I'm just like writing you off on taxes. It's fine. But the reason that I do that is because that kind of generosity was shown to me when I was in college. I had a pastor that every time he took me out to lunch or took me to coffee or whatever, more often than not, he would pay for me or something like that. And so if ever I extend that to you, that's just a paying it forward sort of thing. And the thing is, you pay it forward to someone else. You buy somebody else a cup of coffee that needs it, because this is the part of God as the generous giver of abundance. We become generous givers of abundance, emulating the God whose name we profess. Incarnational sign 1, God is a giver of abundance, and the best is yet to come. Just by a simple act, how are you helping someone believe that tomorrow can be better than today? How are you helping someone believe that tomorrow can be better than today just by your actions? Okay, second story. This is a painting of Jesus being approached by a royal official. And we'll hear the story in a second, but notice what you see here. Jesus is going about his way, and you see somebody on his hands and knees, obviously coming before Jesus. Clearly, he'd been riding a horse up on the left-hand side, and he's gotten off the horse, and he's humbled himself before Jesus. And yet, he's wearing the colors of Rome. He's got a weapon at his side. This is clearly someone of power and prominence who's humbled himself before God. And this is the second semeion, the fingerprint of God, according to John. Listen to this. It says, then he came again to Cana in Galilee, where he had changed the water into wine, just in case you forgot that. Now there was a royal official whose son lay ill in Capernaum. When he heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went and begged him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. And Jesus said to him, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. Now, isn't that the truth? For some people, it's not until we see signs and wonders that we'll believe. You got somebody in your life like that? Show me the proof. Show me the proof of that God believes, and I'll believe. And Jesus is like, some of you, until you see signs and wonders, you just won't believe. And the official said to him, sir, come down before my little boy dies. Notice what he says to him. Sir, come down. Come and see my little boy before he dies. Come down before my little boy dies. But notice what Jesus says to him. Go. Get out of here. Your son will live. Jesus does something unprecedented. He says, I'm not going with you. You go. You told me to come with you. I'm telling you to go. But your son will live. And the man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and started on his way. Now, as he was going down, his slaves met him and told him that his child was alive. And so he asked them the hour that he began to recover, and they said to him, yesterday at 1 PM, the fever left him. And the father realized that this was the hour when Jesus had said to him, your son will live. So he himself believed, along with his whole household. Now this was the second sign that Jesus did after coming from Judea to Galilee. We can pull all kinds of things from this story. What does it mean? Yes, God is certainly the giver of life, and God is a healer, and we love that. There's a lot of instances where God is the healer. But you know what this really shows me? And not just me, but many theologians? It's that God is the giver of life and is present even when it seems contrary. Even when it seems contrary. For this royal official, he had this perspective of, you have to come and do this. You have to come and be with my son in order for my son to live. because that was the idea of presence. But what Jesus is saying is, no. God is omnipresent. And even when it feels like God is not present, you understand that God is present. Understand that God's healing power can be present in those moments, but God is always present. God is the giver of life and is present even when it seems contrary. Now, knowing that, how does that change the way that you interact with the world? Do you see people in situations where it seems as though God is absent? Do you experience people, do you have friends that feel as though God is further than he's ever been? How can you be present and live into that and offer a word of encouragement and hope even when it seems contrary? Incarnational living is about being present. It's about bringing encouragement and comfort when someone feels abandoned. One final story, and we'll close from there. This image, Jesus is by a pool, and we have a man here crippled. And this is a fairly well-known story. If you've been around church a little bit, then you probably have heard this before. But I want you to look at this picture as I read this passage. It says, after this, there was a festival of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now in Jerusalem, by the sheep gate, there is a pool. And it's called in Hebrew Bethzatha, which has 5 porticos. In these lay many invalids, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. And one man who had been there had been ill for 38 years. 38 years. Think about that. 38 years. That's older than me. 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" And that's what a great question. Do you want to be made well? Think about that. Because if he's well, that's a pretty drastic change of life after 38 years. That's pretty amazing. Do you want to be made well? And the guy very well could have said, "No, I am good. I've got a nice life just waiting here by the pool." But here's what he says. The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. And while I'm making my way, someone else steps down ahead of me." Now listen to this. This is actually a side note to this passage. There's something about this pool, and there's this old tradition with this pool, and you can kind of see it as this guy up front is getting in there. The tradition says that when there are ripples in the pool, what's happened is an angel has dipped its wing and touched its wing into that pool. And therefore, there's something supernatural, healing, curative that occurs when that angel's wing touches and there's a ripple. So when the water starts to go and the ripples start to go, all of the invalids, the blind, the lame, those that are in need, the paralyzed, they try to make their way to the pool. Why? Because there's healing properties. And so that makes sense. The sick man answered when he was asked, "Do you want to be made well?" The sick guy says, "Sir, I have no one to put me in there. And by the time I can finally get to it, the ripples are gone, and I can't be made well." Another way of saying this is, I have done everything I can, and I can't get there. Do you know people that are doing the best they can? They're at the end of their rope, and they're saying, "I want to be made well, but I just don't know how to be made well, and I'm about to give up." Well, Jesus said to the man, "Stand up, take your mat, and walk." And what's amazing about this is that at once the man was made well, and he took up his mat and he began to walk. And you know what? He didn't get in the pool. It does not say he got in the pool. He got up and he walked, which further goes to show it's not about the pool. It's not about the superstition, but it's about who Jesus is and what he can declare over a person. Now that day, And this is what's really interesting. Now that day was a Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who had been cured, "It is the Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to carry your mat." Now, don't you love that? We have had this amazing miracle where this guy has been lounging around for 38 years trying to get in the water, and all of a sudden he's up and he's walking, and then the religious police grab him and say, hey, let's not take that mat and walk because it's the Sabbath. But he answered them, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Take up your mat and walk.'" And I'm going to listen to him, okay? Because, wow. That pool thing wasn't working, but this guy knows what's up. And they asked him, "Well, who's the man who told you, 'Take it up and walk'?" Now, the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had disappeared into the crowd that was there. I got to love that. That's a whole other sermon. Jesus, surprise ninja healer, and then he goes and disappears. Later, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you've been made well. Don't sin anymore so that nothing worse happens to you." And the man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who made him well, and therefore the Jews started persecuting Jesus because he was doing such things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, now listen to this is the heart of it. "My Father is still working, and I am also working." Now, what's he saying here? There's a lot that he's saying here. My Father is working. So first of all, he's saying that God is his Father, which is pretty radical for that day. We start a lot of prayers with Almighty Father. Oh, God, our Father. Jesus started that. The other thing is, by calling God his Father, he's also saying the rest of this is true of God. God is still working, and when is God working? On which is typically the day, according to the first account of creation, that God would rest. And so what he's saying is, oh, my Father's still working, and I am also working. Oh yeah, God is working on that Sabbath, is what Jesus is saying here. And for this reason, the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because he was not only breaking the Sabbath, but was also calling God his own Father, thereby making himself equal to God. Now, there's a ton that's coming out in this story. But I want you to hear this more than anything, more than the miracle itself. We have a God revealed in Jesus here who is compassionate and is not restricted by rules and customs that are meant to serve humanity. The Sabbath was made for man to rest. It was not made to confine man. And what Jesus is showing here is that God's compassion does not know human bounds of custom and rules. If you see a need, you fill that need. If you see the need, even if it's inconvenient, even if it's outside of your Sabbath order, get up and go help them. And that's the kind of God that we serve. God, revealed in these three stories, is a God of generous abundance, of life and health and presence, and is a God of compassion over customs. I say this to you today because I think that these three things are things that you, starting today, can live out in your daily life. Who in your life do you need to be generously abundant to? Who can you give to, even if they don't deserve it? Even if they don't deserve it, those bunch of drunks at that wedding, and Jesus is like, let's just give them the best. I don't know about you, but God's given me way more than I deserved, way more than I ever deserved. Who can you offer hope and peace and just a reminder that God is with them? Shoot, these next 2 weeks, people are really starting to freak out, aren't they? A lot of people are like, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my scholarship. Oh my gosh, I don't have a job offer. Oh my gosh, what am I going to do with my life? Some of you are like, I don't even know where I'm going to live next year. My roommate's bailed on me. I have no clue what's going on. Who can you encourage simply by saying some word that refreshes them in their understanding of God's presence? And finally, where are you seeing someone who's at the end of their rope? And how can you show them compassion? You know, when we talk about the Christmas season, it's real easy to look at the symbols, and we look at the tree, and it's like, oh, that's so sweet. And like when I was in middle school and high school, my best friend Lacey and I, we used to go drive around, and we'd go look at all of the Christmas lights, and we would judge them and all this stuff. But there was something amazing that would happen in this. We would get into the Christmas spirit. It's so easy to get into the Christmas spirit when you're driving around, you're looking at all the lights, and you're just enjoying, like listening to Christmas music on, the radio. It's so easy to get caught up in that. But I want to let you know the Christmas spirit is more than trees and reindeer and even the angels, and even more, get this, than the manger. Because if we think of this story as a history lesson that we just get warm fuzzies about, then we've missed the point. The Christmas spirit and the Christmas season is about saying, in Jesus, the nature of God was incarnate. So how can I today embody what we have learned about the nature of God? Would you pray with me?